The Linguaverse Episode 1. What is language? Definitions, origins, and the human tongue content note. This episode contains instances of explicit language used selectively for emphasis within the discussion of linguistic meaning and cultural context. Hi and welcome to the Linguaverse. Language is the water we swim in, the invisible medium that shapes how we think, how we connect, and how we understand ourselves. Yet for something so close, so constant, it is also deeply mysterious. We live inside it, we breathe it, and we rarely stop to ask what it actually is. Think about it. Every day you speak, listen, read, and write. You navigate a world built on conversations, texts, labels, and narratives. You may feel clever when you find just the right phrase, or frustrated when you can't put an experience into words. But where did all of this come from? Why does arranging certain sounds in the air or symbols on a page move bodies, change emotions, and even shape reality? This is the beginning of the Linguaverse, a series dedicated to exploring the strange, powerful, and often hidden dimensions of language. Not just the study of words, but the study of words as spells, of language as an embodied force that leaves traces in our nervous system and guides the way we see the world. Before we can dive into the deeper layers, into mirror neurons, somatic lexicons, taboo, trauma, sacred chants, memes, and machine speech, we need to start where all inquiries begin, by asking the most basic question possible. What is language? It sounds simple, almost too simple. But as with so many human universals, the closer you look, the slipperier it becomes. Language is at once ordinary and extraordinary, both mundane and miraculous. We open our mouths and words pour out. Yet those words carry histories, emotions, and cultural codes that shape far more than we realize. This episode is our entry point. We'll lay a foundation by exploring how scholars, philosophers, and everyday experience have tried to define language. We'll look at the common answers, grammar, symbols, systems, and then stretch those definitions into something more embodied, something closer to what we actually live. Because if language is going to be the lens through which we explore the world in this series, we need to see it in its fullest form, not just as a dictionary in the mind, but as a living bridge between thought, body, and being. Language as the unnoticed medium. The first challenge in defining language is that it's almost invisible. Like air or water, it's so fundamental to our existence that we forget it's even there. When you sit in silence, you may think you've stepped outside of language, but chances are your mind is still narrating in words, even if only faintly. The voice in your head never fully leaves. This makes language strange. It is both outside of us and inside of us. We inherit it from others, but it becomes the very way we experience ourselves. It's a shared system, but also deeply personal. You and I might speak the same language, but the words in your body won't feel the same as the words in mine. Consider the word home. For one person, it might evoke warmth, family dinners, and a sense of belonging. For another, it might stir up tension, arguments, or absence. The dictionary can't capture those differences, yet they are real. This is why language cannot be reduced to a neutral code. It's always carrying something more: history, context, emotion, embodiment, the standard definitions and their limits. So what do scholars say? A classic definition is that language is a structured system of communication using symbols spoken, written, or signed. It is rule-governed. Words combine according to grammar, and meaning arises from the shared use of those symbols. This definition works up to a point. It explains how humans can transmit information across time and space. It explains why you and I can share ideas even if we've never met. But it also misses the heart of the matter. If language were only a system of rules, why does a single word spoken in the wrong tone cut like a knife? Why can silence scream louder than speech? Why do children understand tone before vocabulary? The strict definition leaves out the felt reality of language, the sighs, pauses, rhythms, and embodied signals that make up so much of our communication. And it leaves out how words shape thought itself. Voices from philosophy and linguistics. Different thinkers have wrestled with this problem. Ferdinand de Saussure, often called the father of modern linguistics, argued that every word is a signifier, a sound or image, tied to a signified, the concept it points to. But crucially, meaning only exists in the relationships between words. A dog means what it does because it is not a cat, not a tree, not a car. Language is a web, not a list. Ludwig Wittgenstein famously declared, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." He meant that our ability to think is bound by what we can say. If we lack words for something, our minds struggle to grasp it. In that sense, language doesn't just express thought, it shapes its possibilities. Noam Chomsky went further, suggesting humans are born with a universal grammar, an innate linguistic blueprint. According to Chomsky, we don't learn language from scratch, we unfold it from within. Language, in this view, is part of our biological inheritance. Each of these perspectives adds a piece. Language as a system of signs, as the boundary of thought, as a biological instinct. And yet, none of them alone fully capture what we feel when a word strikes us in the chest, or when silence speaks volumes. Everyday illustrations. Imagine someone says to you, "I'm fine." If they say it warmly, you might believe them. If they snap it through clenched teeth, you know they are anything but fine. The words are the same, the grammar is identical, but the language is completely different. Or think of a sigh. No dictionary entry tells you that a sigh means disappointment, fatigue, or resignation, yet your body recognizes it instantly, or silence. When a friend goes quiet after you've asked if they're okay, the unsaid often speaks louder than the said. All of these moments reveal that language is more than words. It is embodied, contextual, and relational, setting up the somatic turn. This is where the Linguaverse will go further than traditional linguistics. If language is not just symbols, but lived experience, then we need to consider how those experiences get stored in the body. We'll soon explore how caregivers' reactions, their tone, their disgust, and their warmth shape the emotional charge of words inside us. But before that, we must first appreciate that language is not merely a system of information. It is an embodied phenomenon. So let us return to our opening question. What is language? The simple definitions help, but they are incomplete. To really answer, we need to move through philosophy, science, and lived experience. We need to listen to words, but also to sighs, silences, and tones. We need to see language not as a dictionary in the mind, but as a living bridge between thought, body, and being. Defining language is one of the few things that is so close to us, so constant that we almost forget it's there. We swim in it, breathe it, build our lives through it, and yet when asked to define it, most of us falter. We can gesture toward words, rules, or communication, but that only scratches the surface. What we call language is something far more vast, a force that shapes our identities, colors our perceptions, and holds the power to wound, inspire, and bind us together. So what is it really? The standard definitions. The textbook definition of language is straightforward, a system of symbols governed by rules used to communicate. Words combine according to grammar. Meaning is constructed through a shared understanding of those symbols. By this measure, language is a neat code, a logical framework that allows humans to exchange information. And yet, this definition feels clinical, almost lifeless. Because language is not only about what is said, it's about how it's said, and how it lands in the body of the listener. Take the phrase, "I'm fine." Spoken softly with a smile, it may genuinely communicate contentment. Spoken through clenched teeth with narrowed eyes, it communicates the exact opposite. The words themselves don't change, but the language does, because language is more than symbols. It's tone, rhythm, silence, pause, gesture, sigh, and posture. It's everything that happens in the space between the dictionary and the body. This is why anthropologists, philosophers, and linguists have long disagreed on how to define language. To some, it is an instinct wired into the human brain. To others, it is a social invention, an emergent property of our need to connect. For still others, it is something more mystical, a spell of sorts, capable of creating worlds. Voices from philosophy and linguistics. Let's sketch out a few of the most influential perspectives. Ferdinand de Saussure, 1857-1913, considered the father of modern linguistics, defined language as a system of signs. Every word is a signifier, the sound or image, linked to a signified, the concept. But importantly, he argued, words don't have inherent meaning. They mean what they do only in relation to other words. Dog means what it does because it is not a cat, not a tree, not a car. Meaning, in Saussure's view, emerges from a web of differences, not intrinsic properties. Ludwig Wittgenstein, 1889-1951, the philosopher of language, famously wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." He saw language not only as a tool for communication, but as a boundary for thought. If we cannot express something in words, we can barely grasp it in our minds. In this way, language is not a mirror of thought, but its very architecture. Noam Chomsky, 1928, proposed a radical idea, that humans are born with innate, universal grammar. He argued that language is not entirely learned. Instead, the brain comes preloaded with a set of structures that make learning any tongue possible. In his view, language is a biological instinct, something hardwired into our species. Benjamin Lee Whorf, 1897-1941, advanced what became known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. That language doesn't just reflect thought, it shapes it. Cultures with no future tense, for example, perceive time differently from cultures where every sentence requires tense marking. For Whorf, words are not neutral containers, but active shapers of perception. Each of these thinkers captures something essential, but none of them fully explain why words strike us in the chest, why silence screams louder than speech, or why the same word can carry radically different meanings depending on who says it, when, and how. To understand that, we need to dig deeper into lived experience. Language beyond words. Imagine two scenarios. You ask a friend, "Are you okay?" They reply, "I'm fine," with a gentle smile. You exhale, "The matter is settled." 2. You ask another friend the same question. They reply, "I'm fine," but their jaw is tight, their arms crossed. You know immediately they are not fine. In both cases, the words are identical. But the language, the embodied communication, is completely different. This is why defining language only as a system of symbols misses the point. Human beings are experts in layering tone, gesture, and silence over words. Sometimes the unsaid carries more meaning than the said. A pause in a conversation can speak volumes: agreement, resistance, grief, or intimacy. A sigh can collapse an entire mood into a single breath. Language, then, is not reducible to words. It is embodied, contextual, and relational. Personal reflection. Discovering myself through language, I've always been enamored by language. At school, I excelled in French and German, and later in life I achieved GCSEs and an AS level in Italian, qualifications I was genuinely proud of, and that my family celebrated with me. Being half Italian, I was exposed to both English and Italian from birth. When I was younger, I would spend hours reading the dictionary or studying Italian from a battered phrasebook. Yet despite this curiosity, I was too shy to attend the Italian school that ran in my hometown, which had a large migrant Italian community. My family encouraged me, and they spoke with me, but as a child I froze up. Nerves locked me out of real conversation. In my teenage years, something shifted. I made the choice to fully embrace learning Italian. I enrolled in formal classes at school, and, for the first time, approached the language with seriousness. What surprised me was that while English classes at school had never inspired me, we weren't even taught grammar properly, and I felt my written English suffered for it. Italian opened the door back to my own native tongue. Ironically, it was through Italian grammar books that I learned more about English than I ever did through my English studies at school. By breaking down how Italian functioned, I suddenly understood the skeleton of my own language: tenses, structures, agreements, and rhythms that had always been invisible. Italian didn't just give me another voice, it helped me hear my first one more clearly. For me, this is the heart of why language matters. Every tongue we learn doesn't just add words to our arsenal. It changes the way we understand ourselves, our history, and even our own identity. Language as identity and inheritance. Your story is not unique in principle, though the details are. Many bilingual or multilingual people report similar experiences. Learning a second language often deepens their understanding of the first. This is because languages are not isolated codes, they are mirrors of each other. By holding two or more in the mind, we begin to see the invisible scaffolding behind them. But beyond grammar, languages carry cultural inheritance. Italian, for example, is famously rich in emotional expressiveness, gestures, intonation, and musicality. English, by contrast, has often been described as pragmatic, economical, even stiff. To move between the two is not only to change vocabulary, but to step into different emotional worlds. This is why multilingual speakers often report feeling like different people in different tongues. Language is not just a tool for expressing identity, it is part of identity itself. Reflection prompts think of a word that only exists in your language, something untranslatable, or that feels uniquely yours. What emotions does it stir that no other word quite captures? Case study: the word home. The English word home is a perfect example of why language defies simple definitions. The dictionary will tell you it means the place where one lives. But for most people, home carries far more than a physical address. For some, it conjures warmth, belonging, and comfort. For others, it may stir tension, absence, or even dread. The word is the same. The dictionary entry is the same. But the lived meaning is utterly different. This gap between definition and experience is what makes language both powerful and elusive. So what is language? Is it a code? A system of signs? A biological instinct? A cultural inheritance? In truth, it is all of these at once, and something more. It is not only what we say, but how we say it, and how it lives inside us. It is dictionary and memory, grammar and gesture, silence and sigh. This is where we begin, by recognizing that language cannot be reduced to rules or symbols. It is a living phenomenon, one that grows out of the body, out of relationships, out of culture and history. To define language too narrowly is to miss its magic. In the next segment, we'll keep digging into its origins, its evolutionary roots, and its role in shaping what it means to be human. But first, let's sit with this. Every word you speak today carries more than a definition. It carries tone, history, emotion, and memory. To speak is never neutral. Language is the architecture of thought. If language is more than rules and symbols, we also have to face its role as the architecture of thought. This is not just a philosophical curiosity, it is a lived truth. Consider the difference between thinking in words and thinking in images. Both happen, but when we reach for clarity, most of us reach for language. We talk to ourselves silently, running inner monologues, arguments, or daydreams through the grammar of our native tongue. Wittgenstein was right to say the limits of our language are the limits of our world. Try to explain a feeling you cannot name, and you will quickly see the edge of your vocabulary become the edge of your imagination. It isn't that the feeling doesn't exist, it does, fully in your body. But to articulate it, to share it, you need words. Without them, it floats at the edge of consciousness, unspeakable, slippery. This is why cultures with different vocabularies live in slightly different worlds. The Japanese word ame, for instance, describes the comforting dependence a child has on its caregiver, a word with no direct English equivalent. English speakers feel this experience, of course, but without a word for it, the nuance often goes unrecognized. Conversely, English is rich in words for individualism and agency that don't translate neatly into other languages. Each lexicon doesn't just catalogue reality, it filters it. Examples. When language creates new perception, think about color. In Russian, there are two distinct words for what English lumps together as blue: goluboy, light blue, and siny, dark blue. Experiments have shown that Russian speakers are faster at distinguishing shades of blue than English speakers, because their language primes them to notice the difference. Or think of time. In Mandarin, people often describe time vertically, the past is up, and the future is down. In English, we think of it horizontally, the past behind us, the future ahead. Studies suggest that these metaphors actually influence how speakers of each language arrange time-related information in their minds. Language, then, doesn't just describe perception, it sculpts it. It doesn't merely label thought, it organizes it. Language as embodied memory. Yet even this is incomplete without the body. To truly define language, we must recognize it as embodied memory. Think of the first time you were told off as a child. The words may blur, but the tone, the volume, the sting of the moment stays in your nervous system. The word itself carries the echo of that charge. Years later, hearing the same phrase might still tighten your chest. Or consider lullabies. Long before a child understands grammar, they are soothed by the rhythm and tone of their caregiver's voice. Language here is not about information, it is about effect. The meaning is emotional, not semantic. This embodied dimension is what we will later call the somatic lexicon, the body's dictionary of felt meanings. Every sigh, every word, every silence leaves an imprint. Over time, those imprints form the scaffolding for how we understand the world. Language, silence, and power. If language can define thought, silence can distort it. Silence is often assumed to be the opposite of speech, but in reality it is part of language itself. A pause in a courtroom can sway a jury. The refusal to name something can keep it hidden for generations. A secret unspoken in a family becomes a silent language of its own. This is why censorship is so powerful. To remove a word from circulation is not just to remove a label. It is to erase a thought from the collective mind. Conversely, to invent or reclaim a word is to bring something into existence. Think of how terms like trauma, microaggression, or gaslighting have reshaped cultural awareness. Until they had names, these experiences were harder to recognize, harder to discuss, harder to resist. Language is never neutral. It is always tied to power. Case study: taboo words consider profanity. Why does the word fuck carry such a charge, while copulate sounds almost clinical? The answer lies not in semantics, but in history, emotion, and taboo. Children quickly learn that certain words spark strong adult reactions. They absorb not only the sounds, but the emotions attached to them. For one child, fuck is scandalous, whispered on the playground. For another, it's common family banter, stripped of stigma. The dictionary definition is irrelevant. What matters is the embodied inheritance of meaning. This reveals a key truth: language is social, not solitary. We inherit its emotional contours from others long before we consciously reflect on them. Words do not float free, they are steeped in the affective reactions of our communities. Reflection prompts to think of a word that once felt shocking to you, but no longer does. What changed? Did you grow desensitized, or did the culture around you shift? How did your body's response evolve? Language as performance. Another lens on language is to see it as performance. Irving Goffman's sociological work describes everyday life as a kind of theatre, where language is part of the costume and script. We play roles through speech, modulating how we speak depending on whether we're talking to a friend, a boss, or a stranger. Here, language is not just about conveying information, but about signaling identity. Our accents, vocabularies, and tones position us within social hierarchies, whether we like it or not. A clipped formal register may signal professionalism, slang may signal solidarity. Every utterance is a small act of identity. This also complicates the definition of language. It is not simply about communication, but about positioning, about who we are, who we want to be, and how we are seen. Practical activity. Over the next 24 hours, pay attention to how your language shifts depending on who you're speaking with. Do you soften your tone with some people and sharpen it with others? Do you choose different words in professional versus personal contexts? Write down 3 examples of how your speech changed and what that shift was performing. Language and emotion, the spells we cast. Now we arrive at the heart of this first part, the recognition that language is not just descriptive, but generative. To say something is not only to label it, but it is to call it into being. This is why we talk about spells. To tell a child they are stupid plants a seed that may grow into a lifelong narrative. To tell someone they are loved plants another. Words are not just reflections of reality, they are interventions in it. This view is not mystical, though it can sound that way. It is grounded in psychology and neuroscience. Repetition, tone, and affirmation do alter neural pathways. Chanting, prayer, and mantras can shift physiology. Advertisements, slogans, and propaganda can mobilize nations. The tongue, in this sense, is indeed a wand. Returning to the question. So let's return to the question that launched us. What is language? A system of symbols. Yes, but more. A biological instinct. Yes, but more. A boundary of thought. Yes, but more. A performance of identity. Yes, but more. An embodied inheritance of emotion. Yes, and perhaps most importantly, language is not one thing, but many. It is definition and memory, code and spell, silence and sound. It is the architecture of thought, the map of culture, and the spellbook of the body. Defining language is like trying to hold smoke in your hands. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers. And yet, by loosening the grip, by allowing it to swirl, you begin to see its patterns. For this first part, the most honest answer may be this. Language is the living bridge between thought, body, and world. It is the way we connect with others, the way we remember ourselves, and the way we shape reality itself. With this foundation in place, we can now move forward. In part 2, we will travel back to the origins of language, its evolutionary roots, and the moment when sound first became a symbol. Because to understand what language is, we must also ask where it came from, the origins of language. If language is the bridge between thought, body, and world, then where did this bridge begin? At what point in human history did sound become symbol, and symbol become meaning? The origins of language are among the most debated mysteries in science. Unlike bones, tools, or pottery, language doesn't fossilize. It leaves no physical traces we can dig up, no artifacts that can be catalogued. We can study cave paintings, stone tools, and burial sites, but we cannot find the first conversation, the first joke, or the first lullaby. Language emerges and disappears in the air, carried by breath, vanishing as quickly as it is spoken. This makes it both elusive and tantalizing. To ask where language came from is to peer into the deep history of our species, to reconstruct from indirect clues the moment when humans first began to weave worlds with words. Why the question matters, it may seem abstract, even unanswerable. But the question of origins shapes how we understand language today. If language is hardwired into us, then it is universal and inevitable, part of what it means to be human. If it is learned socially, then it is contingent, fragile, and dependent on culture. If it emerged from ritual or song, then its essence is not logic, but rhythm and emotion. Each theory offers not only a scientific story, but a metaphor for what language is. And those metaphors influence how we treat language in schools, in politics, in therapy, in our own lives. The competing theories scholars have proposed many explanations for the origins of language. None can be proven definitively, but each highlights a facet of what language might be. 1. The nativist view, Chomsky and universal grammar. Language, in this theory, is an instinct. Humans are born with a pre-wired language acquisition device that allows children to absorb grammar at astonishing speed. Evidence. Children learn to speak fluently without formal instruction, and across cultures, they reach milestones in similar patterns. In this view, language didn't just evolve, it arrived as a sudden mutation, a leap in brain design. 2. The emergentist view, social theories. Language evolved gradually as an extension of social signaling. Early humans needed to coordinate hunts, warn of danger, and bond groups together. Vocalizations became more complex until they formed structured communication. In this view, language is not an instinct but an adaptation to social living. 3. The ritual song hypothesis. Some anthropologists suggest language began not with information, but with music, rhythm, chant, and ritualized sound-bound communities together. Over time, these sounds crystallized into words and meanings. Language, then, is born from poetry and prayer, not from logic. 4. The gesture-first hypothesis. Before vocal speech, early humans may have communicated through gesture. Evidence. Primates use rich gestural communication. Sign languages today are fully functional languages. In this view, speech evolved later, layered on top of gesture. 5. The tool-making hypothesis. The brain circuits for fine motor control in tool-making may overlap with those needed for complex speech. The precision required to shape stone tools could have paved the way for shaping sounds. Each theory captures something true, and perhaps all are partly correct. Language likely did not have a single origin, but emerged from the convergence of biology, culture, ritual, and necessity. Archaeological clues. Although language itself leaves no fossils, we can infer its origins from indirect evidence. Symbolic art. The earliest cave paintings, etched around 40,000 years ago, suggest symbolic thought. If humans could represent animals in images, they likely could represent them in words. Burial sites. Graves with ornaments, beads, or ritual goods imply shared beliefs, the kind of beliefs that require shared stories. Tools. Complex tools require teaching, and teaching requires structured communication. Most scholars believe that fully developed language emerged sometime between 50,000 and 150,000 years ago. a span that coincides with the rise of Homo sapiens as a culturally dominant species. Case study: the Neanderthal debate. Did Neanderthals have language? This question has fascinated researchers. Their brains were as large as ours, and they crafted sophisticated tools. Evidence suggests they buried their dead with flowers, possibly with ritual significance. Fossilized hyoid bones in the throat suggest they were physically capable of speech. Some argue Neanderthals had full language. Others think they had a proto-language complex, but not as flexible as ours. Either way, the debate reminds us that language is not only about capacity, but about use. To have the anatomy for speech is one thing. To use it for abstract storytelling is another. Language as survival. One of the most compelling arguments is that language evolved because it gave us a survival edge: coordination. Hunting large animals required planning and strategy. Words made this possible. Warning. Specific signals could distinguish between types of danger, predators, rival groups, and natural threats. Bonding. Shared stories, jokes, and myths created social cohesion, strengthening group identity. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar proposed the gossip hypothesis. Language replaced grooming as the primary way humans bonded. In primates, grooming cements relationships, but it is slow and one-to-one. Gossip, by contrast, can bond many individuals at once. In this view, the real evolutionary function of language was not transmitting facts, but sharing stories, a far more efficient glue for large groups. Reflection prompt: think of the last time you told a story, even a short one, like recounting your day. Did it serve to transfer information or to bond with someone? What do you think language is for in your own life? Origins and embodiment. To understand the origins of language, we also need to remember the body. Speech requires a unique configuration of anatomy, a descended larynx, a finely controlled tongue, and neural circuits linking auditory and motor regions. This anatomical foundation is what makes humans distinct. Many animals communicate with calls or songs, but only humans combine sounds into infinite combinations of meaning. The tongue itself is extraordinary, a muscular, flexible organ capable of shaping air into thousands of subtle variations. In this sense, the tongue is literally the tool of human evolution, the muscle that made civilization possible. The origins of language remain an open mystery. Was it a sudden mutation, a gradual social adaptation, a song that turned into speech, or a dance of hands that became voice? Perhaps it was all of these. What matters for us in the Linguaverse is not pinning down a single answer, but recognizing that language is both ancient and layered. It carries traces of ritual, survival, biology, and culture. Every word we speak today is the descendant of chants around fires, gestures under trees, and survival cries in the dark. In the next section, we'll push deeper into these themes, exploring how the evolution of language intersects with identity, symbolism, and the very concept of meaning. Because to ask where language began is also to ask where we began as humans, as storytellers, as spellcasters. The origins of language. If survival gave us the push towards language, it was storytelling that gave us the pull. Once humans could label objects and actions, the next leap was to string them into narratives. This shift transformed language from a tool into a universe. From symbols to stories, stories allowed us to do something no other species could: carry knowledge across time. A single hunt could be remembered and retold for generations. A danger encountered once could become a warning that outlived its witnesses. A myth whispered around a fire could shape moral codes for centuries. The anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss argued that myths are not just entertainment, but frameworks of thought, ways cultures organize the world into categories, opposites, and moral structures. In this view, the birth of storytelling was the birth of culture itself. Symbols as seeds of consciousness, symbols were the scaffolding. A mark on a cave wall, a carved figurine, a bead buried with the dead, all of these carried meaning beyond their physical form. To create a symbol is to declare that something represents something else. It is to step beyond the immediate into the abstract. Language is the most fluid and flexible of all symbols, but it sits in a continuum with art, ritual, and gesture. The leap from sound to symbol, from gesture to word, was not clean or sudden. It was gradual, layered, overlapping. This is why the origins of language are so hard to pin down. They are woven into the broader origins of human consciousness. The sacred roots of language. In many cultures, the earliest uses of language were sacred. Words were not neutral descriptors. They were spells, chants, invocations. In ancient Egypt, the word heka meant both magic and speech. To speak was to perform magic. In Vedic India, the hymns of the Rig Veda were seen as cosmic vibrations, language as the sound of creation itself. In indigenous traditions across the world, names were thought to carry power. To know the true name of something was to hold sway over it. This sacred view of language is not superstition. It reflects a deep intuition. Words change reality. Call someone a leader, and they may step into that role. Call someone a curse, and they may wither under its weight. Language is performative. It doesn't just describe the world, it reshapes it. The role of emotion in early speech. Another clue to language's origins lies in emotion. Before words named things, they likely named feelings. Primal cries of fear, joy, and anger are shared across species. Humans may have shaped these emotional vocalizations into more complex forms. The first words may have been calls of warning, cries of pain, or songs of love. This idea connects language not to logic, but to the body. It suggests that at its root, language is not about facts, but about feelings. This will later connect to the mirror linguistic hypothesis, the idea that words carry emotional charge, inherited from how they were modeled in our earliest relationships. Case study. Lullabies consider lullabies. Across every culture, caregivers sing to soothe infants. The words may be nonsensical, the melody simple, but the effect is universal. The child relaxes, breath slows, trust deepens. Before a child understands any vocabulary, they understand tone. The lullaby is language stripped to its essence: rhythm, repetition, emotional resonance. This is likely how language began, not as lectures or lists, but as songs and spells. The gesture debate revisited gesture too deserves a second look. Modern sign languages prove that gesture can be a fully expressive medium of thought. They have grammar, nuance, and metaphor. It's possible that early humans developed complex gestural systems long before speech. In noisy environments or across distances, gesture might have been more reliable. Speech may have evolved later as a supplement, then eventually as the dominant mode. Even today, speech and gesture are inseparable. Watch anyone talk passionately, and their hands will dance. Language lives in the body, not just the tongue. Reflection prompt. Think about the last time you used your hands to emphasize what you were saying. Were you aware of it, or did it happen automatically? What would your words have lost if your hands had been still? The social brain and the gossip hypothesis. We return now to Robin Dunbar's gossip hypothesis, which suggests that language evolved as a replacement for grooming in primates. Grooming bonds two individuals. Gossip bonds entire groups. Through gossip, humans could maintain social cohesion in groups far larger than any other primates. This was not trivial. Large groups mean more safety, more cooperation, and more survival. But gossip also gave rise to morality, reputation, and social norms. To speak of someone in their absence is to shape their social reality. This power, to define another's identity through words, is one of the most profound aspects of language. It shows us again that language is not just about communication, it is about control. Language and play. Another often overlooked dimension of language's origin is play. Children babble, rhyme, and invent nonsense long before they master grammar. Play is how they explore the possibilities of sound. It's possible that our ancestors, too, experimented playfully with sound before it carried fixed meaning. Just as children chant rhymes for fun, early humans may have found joy in vocal patterns long before those patterns crystallized into words. Play, in this sense, is not trivial. It is an evolutionary rehearsal. It is through play that the potential of language emerges. The evolutionary timeline. While exact dates are impossible, researchers sketch a rough sequence. 2 million years ago, Homo erectus uses basic vocalizations alongside gestures. 500,000 years ago, Homo heidelbergensis shows evidence of proto-language. 200,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans emerge with the physiology for complex speech. 50,000, 100,000 years ago, explosion of symbolic culture, cave art, burial rituals, and myths. Likely the point when fully developed language flourished. This timeline shows that language is not an add-on to humanity. It is humanity. Our art, our rituals, our societies all emerged alongside our capacity for words. Case study. The first word. What was the first word ever spoken? We'll never know, but imagining it is illuminating. Perhaps it was a warning cry. Snake. Perhaps it was a call of belonging. Mother. Perhaps it was a name, a way of binding identity to sound. Whatever it was, it changed everything. The moment sound became a symbol, humans crossed a threshold. From that moment on, reality could be stored, shared, manipulated, and remembered through words. The mystery that remains despite all the theories and evidence, the origins of language remain unresolved. Was it instinct or invention, song or signal, mutation or slow growth? Perhaps the better answer is that it was all of these at once. The mystery is part of the magic. If we knew precisely when and how language began, it might seem ordinary. Its elusiveness reminds us that language is not just a tool, but a miracle, the everyday miracle we use without thinking, the spell we cast with every breath. Practical activity. Try this. Spend a few minutes today speaking only in gestures. Use your hands, your face, your body. Notice what can be communicated without words and what cannot. Then, switch back to speech. Pay attention to the difference. This small exercise mirrors the evolutionary journey, from gesture to speech, from body to symbol. It reconnects us to the origins of language as something embodied, not abstract. The origins of language are not a puzzle to be solved, but a story to be remembered. A story of survival and song, of gesture and gossip, of ritual and rhythm. Language did not appear fully formed. It grew out of the soil of our bodies, our fears, our desires, our need to belong. To define language without honoring its origins is to miss its depth. Every word we speak today carries echoes of the first cries, the first songs, the first stories whispered in the dark. With this in mind, we move to the next part of our journey, the evolution of meaning itself. From symbols to spells, from labels to worlds, how words came to carry not only information, but the power to shape perception. From symbols to spells, the evolution of meaning. We've seen how language likely emerged from gesture, song, survival cries, and social bonding. But origins alone don't explain how words became what they are today. Vessels of layered meaning, capable not just of describing the world but of shaping it. To grasp this, we need to explore how symbols turned into spells, how the simple act of naming evolved into the complex fabric of meaning we now inhabit. Symbols as the first spells, at its core, a symbol is a stand-in. A sound or mark represents something else. When our ancestors carved animals into cave walls or painted handprints onto stone, they were doing more than making art. They were announcing the human capacity to let one thing stand for another. This act of representation is already magical. It allows presence in absence, continuity across time. A picture of a bison is not a bison, but it carries the bison's presence into the cave. A word for bison allows the animal to live in conversation, even when it is nowhere near. Symbols are the seeds of abstraction, and abstraction is the soil of meaning. The growth of lexicons, as words accumulated, they formed lexicons, shared vocabularies, but the meanings of these words were never fixed. They shifted according to use, context, and emotional charge. Take the English word knight. Once it simply meant servant. Over centuries, it came to signify a warrior of honor and prestige. Or consider the word awful. It originally meant full of awe, something inspiring reverence. Today it means terrible. Language is always in flux. Words carry their histories like sediment, layers of meaning deposited, eroded, reshaped. This mutability is part of their spell-like quality. A word can change its context, and in doing so, change the way we see the world. From naming to world-making naming, something is powerful because it doesn't just identify, it defines. To call a plant medicine or poison alters how it will be approached. To label a group friend or enemy changes the course of history. This is where language moves from description to creation. The philosopher J.L. Austin called this speech acts, utterances that don't just say something but do something. Examples include, I now pronounce you married. You're under arrest. I promise. These are words that make reality shift through their very articulation. But it isn't only formal declarations. Every day, language constantly reshapes reality. A parent calling a child lazy plants a spell of identity that may last years. A teacher saying, you're gifted, can alter the trajectory of a life. Case study. The power of labels psychologist Robert Rosenthal conducted a famous study in the 1960s. Teachers were told that certain students had been identified as late bloomers who would show a sudden burst of intellectual growth. In reality, the students were chosen at random. By the end of the year, those students had, in fact, performed better. Why? Because the teacher's expectations shaped their interactions, more encouragement, more patience, and more attention. The label created the outcome. This experiment shows how words don't just reflect reality, they bend it. Labels are linguistic spells that shape the future. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis revisited. We touched earlier on Benjamin Lee Whorf's claim that language shapes thought. This idea, often called linguistic relativity, is controversial but compelling. Examples abound. In Inuit languages, multiple words for snow make speakers more attuned to its variations. In Hopi, the absence of certain time markers leads to a different sense of temporality. In English, the gender-neutral, they reshapes not only grammar but cultural understandings of identity. Whether or not strong forms of Whorf's hypothesis hold, the evidence is clear that language influences perception. It directs attention, carves categories, and highlights some features while obscuring others. In this sense, every language is a worldview. To speak is to inhabit a spell of perception, personal reflection, the dictionary phase. When I was younger, I would spend hours reading the dictionary. To some, that might sound eccentric, but for me, it was a fascination with how each word opened a door. A word I hadn't known the day before could suddenly explain something I had felt for years. Later, when I studied Italian more seriously, I found myself drawn first to grammar, the skeleton of meaning. But what struck me was how learning Italian grammar illuminated English. Tenses, moods, and structures I had never been taught in English suddenly became clear. By learning one system of spells, I could see the hidden patterns of another. It was then that I realized that language is never neutral. It is layered, historical, and embodied. To learn a new tongue is to acquire not just vocabulary, but a new way of perceiving reality. Reflection prompt think of a time when a new word changed how you saw something. Maybe it was a concept like gaslighting or a foreign word with no English equivalent. How did that word alter your perception of the experience it described? Language as emotional architecture words are not only abstract categories, they are emotional triggers. The word mother can evoke warmth in one person, grief in another. The word failure can crush or motivate, depending on its history in the body. This is why slogans, chants, and mantras are powerful. Repetition builds grooves in the nervous system. Say something enough times, and it becomes felt truth. Politicians know this. Advertisers know this. Ritual specialists across cultures have always known this. The spell-like quality of language is not metaphorical. It is physiological. We have moved from the first symbols etched in caves to the recognition of words as world makers. Language does not simply label reality, it shapes it. Each word is a thread in the fabric of perception, a spell that directs thought, emotion, and identity. In the next section, we'll push further into this. How meaning itself evolves, how words carry sedimented histories, and how the same word can transform across cultures and centuries. We'll see how the evolution of meaning reveals the spell-like core of language, not just as communication, but as creation. Language as sedimented history. Every word we speak carries sediment, layers of history compacted into its syllables. Some of these layers are visible, like old meanings fossilized in etymology. Awful once meant full of awe. Others are invisible, embedded in the emotional reactions we inherit from those who spoke the words before us. When I reflect on my own childhood, I realize how many words I learned not from dictionaries, but from the faces of adults. Words like naughty, lazy, or good came wrapped in tone, in size, in smiles or frowns. The word itself was less important than the emotional atmosphere in which it arrived. Later, when I began to peel back these layers, I realized language itself was one of the hidden architects of my inner child. Whole scripts had been written into me by the time I could form full sentences. This is why language is not only a cultural phenomenon, it is deeply personal, etched into the nervous system of each child who grows up listening to the adults around them. The emotional weight of words. Consider the phrase, "I'm disappointed in you." In one household, it may land as a mild correction, soon forgotten. In another, it may cut deeper than anger, planting shame that lingers for decades. Words carry weight not because of their dictionary definitions, but because of their histories in bodies. This is why some adults spend years in therapy, untangling the meaning of phrases they first heard as children. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I explored how language functions as both wound and salve. The labels we are given in childhood, too sensitive, too quiet, too much, become spells we carry long after the original speaker has forgotten them. Healing, in part, is learning to rewrite these spells, to give new meaning to old words. Case study, reframing the word broken. For much of my life, the word broken carried shame. It suggested something damaged, incomplete, unworthy. Yet over time I came to see that brokenness can also mean openness, the cracks through which light gets in. Reframing the word did not erase its sting, but it gave it a second life. Broken became not just an accusation, but a doorway to transformation. This is the alchemy of language. The same word, once a curse, can be reclaimed as a source of power. This personal example mirrors what cultures do collectively when they reclaim slurs or taboos. Meaning is never fixed. Words are living spells, and they can be rewritten. Language is control and liberation. If words can wound, they can also liberate. This is why those in power are always concerned with controlling language. To ban words, to dictate meanings, to frame narratives, these are not trivial acts. They are attempts to control thought itself. We see this in politics, where euphemisms like collateral damage soften the reality of civilian deaths. We see it in education, where certain dialects are labelled incorrect or improper, shaping whose voices are valued. We see it in families, where silence around topics like sex, death, or mental health creates unspoken scripts of repression. But the opposite is also true. To give people words they didn't have before, trauma, gaslighting, and neurodivergent, is to give them a new way of seeing themselves, a new spell to counter the old ones. Reflection prompt: think of one word that once controlled you, and one word that freed you. What shifted between the two? How did your body respond differently? Personal reflection. Silence as language in the unfiltered human on the fringe. I've often circled back to silence, envy unsaid, shame unspoken, anger swallowed. I came to realize that silence is not the absence of language, but its shadow. It communicates as powerfully as speech, sometimes more so. Growing up, I learned to read silence as carefully as words. A room could be thick with it. Silence could mean love withheld, approval denied, or danger lurking. Later, I noticed how I carry these silences into adulthood, sometimes leaving things unsaid out of fear. From a linguistic perspective, silence is a wordless spell. It frames meaning, creates tension, and withholds information. Just as pauses in a sentence shape rhythm, silences in relationships shape identities. To break the silence is often the first act of liberation. Meaning as collective spellwork. If language is alive in the body, it is also alive in communities. Words gather power when they are repeated, shared, and ritualized. A chant shouted by thousands in protest carries a different weight than the same words muttered alone. A prayer repeated daily across generations accumulates force. This is what makes language spell-like. It doesn't need to be mystical to be magical. The magic is in repetition, rhythm, and resonance. Words echo in bodies until they take root as reality. Consider advertising slogans like "just do it" or "because you're worth it." They are simple, almost trivial, yet through endless repetition and cultural reinforcement, they become guiding mantras. Millions of people internalize them, embodying corporate spells as personal truths. The fluidity of meaning. What fascinates me most is how unstable meaning is. A word that once carried pride can become an insult. A word that once wounded can be reclaimed. Take the word queer. For decades, it was hurled as an insult. Today, it is a banner of identity, for many a word of power. The sound is the same, the letters unchanged. What shifted was the collective spell surrounding it. This shows us that language is never finished. It is always being rewritten, by individuals, by communities, by power struggles and acts of resistance. Case study. Fine as a cultural spell. The English phrase "I'm fine" is almost a cultural reflex. It is often used not to convey truth, but to deflect, to maintain social smoothness. Its spell is one of concealment. But imagine the same phrase in Italian, "sto bene." Spoken sincerely, it usually means what it says. The difference isn't in the words themselves, but in the cultural scripts that guide their use. This reveals another layer of spellwork, pragmatics. The same phrase can function as honesty in one culture and as a mask in another. The spell lies not in the word, but in the context. Reflection prompt. What phrase do you use most often as a mask? What would happen if you spoke the truth instead? Personal reflection. The spells I inherited. Looking back through my own story, I can see entire chains of language that shaped me. Words like responsible, clever, and sensitive were used with pride in my family, but others, lazy, shy, stubborn, stuck like thorns. In The Body Knows, I explored how these words became embodied states. My body would tense before I even heard them, as though bracing for their impact. Over time, I began to realize that my nervous system had been trained by words as much as by actions. I was carrying a lexicon of spells in my very flesh. Reframing these words has been part of my healing. To see sensitivity not as weakness but as empathy. To see stubbornness not as a defect but as resilience. To see laziness not as failure but as a signal of exhaustion. This is the work of linguistic alchemy, turning inherited curses into chosen spells. Practical activity. Choose one word that has haunted you. Write it on a piece of paper. Sit with it. Notice what your body does. Tension, heat, memories. Then rewrite the word in a new frame. Add adjectives. Flip its meaning. Reclaim its power. Say it aloud in its new form. Repeat it until your body begins to feel the shift. From symbols on cave walls to chants in protests, from childhood nicknames to cultural slogans, meaning has always been spellwork. Words are never fixed. They are alive, embodied, contested. They can wound, heal, conceal, and liberate. The evolution of meaning shows us that language is not a static code, but a living enchantment, one we inherit, but also one we can rewrite. With this in mind, we are ready to move into the next part of our journey. The somatic lexicon, how words become embodied memories, etched into our nervous systems, shaping not only what we say but how we feel. The somatic lexicon, words as embodied memory. Up to now, we've explored definitions, origins, and the evolution of meaning. We've seen language as symbol, story, spell. But there's another layer, one that lives not in dictionaries or histories, but in the body. This is what I call the somatic lexicon. Let's break that down. Somatic means of the body, your lived physical and felt experience. Lexicon is the vocabulary of a language or of a person. Put them together, and the somatic lexicon is your body's dictionary. The collection of words that carry physical, emotional weight for you, based on the experiences you've lived through. It's the tightening in your chest when you hear lazy. It's the warmth in your stomach when someone says proud. It's the hollow ache when you hear goodbye. Everybody is filled with these entries, some light, some heavy, some inherited, some chosen. They are not just words. They are embodied memories. How the somatic lexicon forms. From the moment we are born, words arrive wrapped in tone, facial expression, and context. Babies don't understand grammar, but they understand emotion. They know comfort, tension, love, and disapproval. A caregiver says no with a sharp voice, and the word imprints as danger. Another says good boy with warmth, and the word imprints as safety. A teacher says wrong in front of peers, and the word imprints as shame. Over time, these imprints accumulate. Words become coded with emotion, stored not just in memory, but in the nervous system. This is why adults can still flinch at certain words decades later. The reaction isn't to the dictionary meaning, it's to the embodied history. Case study, the word sensitive. For much of my life, the word sensitive felt like a curse. Teachers used it to suggest fragility. Adults used it to dismiss my reactions. In my body, being sensitive meant being weak. But years later, I began to reclaim it. I saw that sensitivity also meant empathy, intuition, and depth. When I reframed it, the bodily charge shifted. The same word now feels like recognition, not dismissal. This is the somatic lexicon in action. Words are not fixed. Their bodily entries can be rewritten. Why it matters understanding the somatic lexicon is crucial because it shows us that language isn't abstract. It's not something floating in the mind, separate from flesh. It is inscribed in the body. This insight has profound implications. It explains why certain words trigger disproportionate reactions. It highlights why therapy often involves revisiting language and reframing it. It shows why cultural taboos carry such force. They are bodily charged. In short, our somatic lexicon is one of the hidden operating systems of our lives. Personal reflection. Words that stayed with me in my inner child was broken. I traced how certain words haunted me. Lazy was one. It was never just feedback. It was an accusation, a dismissal of my worth. I felt it in my shoulders, heavy and slumping. But there were also words of nourishment. When my Italian teacher praised my progress, calling me bravo, the word lit me up. It felt expansive, almost musical. I can still feel that glow today. These contrasts taught me something important. The body remembers words long after the moment has passed. Every compliment, every insult, every nickname is stored somewhere in the somatic lexicon. The neuroscience behind its science offers clues about how this works. Mirror neurons, specialized brain cells that activate both when we act and when we observe others. They may play a role in how we absorb caregivers' emotional reactions to words. Amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system. It tags words with emotional salience, especially when paired with strong affect. Implicit memory. Not all memory is conscious. Many word associations are implicit, felt in the body without conscious recall. Together, these mechanisms explain why the word failure can raise cortisol levels, or why affirmations repeated sincerely can alter mood and self-perception. The somatic lexicon is not a poetic metaphor, it is a neurobiological reality. Reflection prompt. What's one word you carry in your body that feels heavier than its dictionary meaning? Where do you feel it when it's spoken? The somatic lexicon reveals a deeper truth. Language doesn't just pass through us, it inhabits us. Every word is a potential trigger, a potential balm. Our bodies are walking dictionaries of lived language. But unlike dictionaries, these entries can be rewritten. Words can be reframed, reclaimed, recharged. In the next section, we'll explore how, through stories, therapy, and conscious practice, we can learn to edit our somatic lexicons, transforming inherited spells into chosen ones, inherited dictionaries. We are all born into languages already alive with history. Long before we can speak, we inherit their emotional textures. A baby doesn't know the meaning of naughty, but they feel the raised eyebrow, the sharp tone, the withheld affection. In this way, our first dictionaries are not paper books, but the faces and voices of our caregivers. By the time we can talk back, much of the somatic lexicon is already established. Whole constellations of words are charged with approval, shame, belonging, or fear. They become invisible scaffolding for our inner world. In the Inversiverse, I argued that indoctrination often works less through ideology and more through repetition of emotionally charged words: freedom, evil, safety. These are not neutral terms. They are anchors in the somatic lexicon of entire populations. The personal and the political meet here. Our bodies carry the weight of cultural language just as much as family language. The spells we don't know we carry. One of the most striking things I've learned is that many of the words that control us are invisible until someone points them out. In Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, I explored envy, lust, anger, shame, emotions often hidden behind words we are forbidden to say aloud. Silence around those words gave them extra power. They became shadows, ruling from underneath. The same is true of the words we avoid in daily life. Many families never say love aloud, but the absence of the word becomes its own entry in the somatic lexicon, a word-shaped silence that hums in the body. Case study. Good. The word good is one of the most deceptively heavy words in the English language. On the surface, it's simple praise. But in families, schools, and religions, good often means compliant. As a child, I learned quickly that being called good meant I was safe, accepted, and approved. But it also meant suppressing anger, hiding need, playing roles. Later, I realized that good had split me in two. The external self that performed goodness, and the inner self that carried unspoken contradictions. The dictionary definition of good doesn't capture this. My body's definition, my somatic lexicon entry, was entirely different. The layering of trauma in language trauma reshapes the somatic lexicon in profound ways. Words linked to painful experiences can become permanent triggers. A single phrase overheard in a moment of vulnerability can become a lifelong echo. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I reflected on how words used in anger carved themselves into me. A shouted lazy or useless was not just sound. It was an embodied experience, one that tightened my muscles and reshaped my posture. Over the years, those words trained me to anticipate rejection before it came. But healing, too, often comes through language. A kind word spoken at the right time can rewire the same circuits. The nervous system is plastic. The somatic lexicon can be edited. Rewriting the somatic lexicon. This editing process is what I now see as linguistic alchemy. It's not about denying the weight of old words, but about reframing them, reclaiming them, creating new associations. A therapist who consistently names your pain without judgment rewrites the entry for weak. A community that celebrates your identity rewrites the entry for different. A partner who calls you beautiful in moments you feel ugly rewrites the entry for worth. Through repetition and new emotional charge, words can be rehabilitated. The spell is broken not by erasing the old meaning, but by layering it with new ones. Reflection prompt: choose one word that has hurt you. Write it down. Now imagine hearing it from the mouth of someone who loves you, spoken with kindness. What changes in your body when you picture that? Personal reflection: learning English through Italian. When I began studying Italian seriously, grammar became my entry point. Ironically, this is when I finally understood the grammar of English. By learning how Italian tenses and moods worked, I discovered structures I had never been taught in my native tongue. But more than that, Italian carried a warmth, a rhythm, an expressiveness that felt different in my body. Words like abbraccio, embrace, or mama carried an intimacy that English versions seem to lack. Speaking of them lit up different parts of me, I also really feel good when I use the phrase, per sempre. Sempre is such a cool word. The way it rolls off the tongue, it means always, with the combination of per, which means forever. This made me realize that my somatic lexicon was bilingual, layered differently in each tongue. English carried restraint. Italian carried expansion. Switching between them was like switching between emotional selves. This is why learning another language can be so transformative. It doesn't just give you new words, it gives you new bodily entries for meaning. The science of reframing cognitive psychology has a term for this process: reappraisal. By consciously reframing the meaning of a word or event, we change its emotional impact. Neuroscience shows that this activates the prefrontal cortex, which can downregulate the amygdala's emotional response. In simpler terms, reinterpretation literally changes the brain's wiring around words. This is why affirmations, mantras, and therapeutic reframing work, not because they erase old pain, but because they build new pathways alongside it. Over time, the body learns to respond differently. The political dimension of somatic lexicons aren't just individual, they are collective. Words like freedom, security, or progress are emotionally charged across whole societies. Politicians know this. They don't argue policies in abstract terms. They weaponize these charged words. For example, calling a military intervention a peacekeeping mission alters its emotional reception. The body relaxes where it might have tensed. The same action feels different because the somatic lexicon entry for peace is invoked. In the Inversiverse, I explored how propaganda relies on hijacking collective lexicons. Once you understand this, you can begin to see through the spells cast at scale. Case study: reclaiming silence. For years, silence was a language of fear for me. It meant disapproval, distance, rejection. But in time, I learned to reclaim silence as something else: rest, reflection, even power. This was not an abstract realization. It was somatic. My body had to relearn that a quiet room was not always dangerous. That silence could be chosen, not imposed. In this way, I rewrote the entry for silence in my somatic lexicon. From absence to presence, from fear to peace. Practical activity: take 5 minutes and list 3 words that trigger you. Next to each, write the physical reaction you feel: tightness in the chest, heat in the face, sinking in the stomach. Then, write an alternative frame for each word. For example, stubborn to resilient, weak to open, broken to transformed, or broken to whole. Say these reframed words aloud, slowly, noticing what shifts in your body. The somatic lexicon is where language and body meet. It is the living dictionary written in muscle, breath, and memory. It explains why words matter more than we admit, why childhood phrases echo into adulthood, and why reframing a single word can open a new future. To define language without this dimension is to miss its most intimate truth, that words live in flesh. As we move forward, we'll expand on this, exploring how the somatic lexicon links to mirror neurons, cultural scripts, and the very possibility of rewriting reality. Because if words are embodied spells, then learning to edit our somatic lexicon may be one of the most powerful acts of freedom we can undertake. Words we live by. As we bring this first step in the Linguaverse to a close, pause for a moment. Take a breath. Ask yourself one simple question: which single word feels most alive in your body right now? Not the word you just heard, not a word from the dictionary, but the word you felt most deeply as we moved through these ideas together. Was it a word from childhood? A phrase you've inherited? A sound that opens or wounds? That word is not just in your mind, it is in your flesh. It has weight, texture, and memory. Naming it now allows you to see how language is not abstract, but embodied. Activity tonight. Before you go to sleep, whisper that word once. Say it softly, not for anyone else, but for yourself. Notice how it feels in your body. Does your chest tighten or soften? Does your stomach clench or release? Does your throat close or open? This is your first practical step in the Linguaverse. To notice not only the words you speak, but how they live in your body. We began this episode with a question: what is language really? We saw that dictionary definitions, systems of symbols, grammar, and meaning are useful, but incomplete. Language is also tone, rhythm, gesture, and silence. It is not only the words on a page, but the pauses between them, the sighs, the raised eyebrows, the embodied music of speech. We look back at its origins, the proto-speech of our ancestors, the ritual chants around fire, and the gestures that may have preceded vocal cords. We explored competing theories, Chomsky's universal grammar, the social emergent view, and the ritual song hypothesis. We saw how language gave us survival advantages, warning of danger, bonding groups, and gossiping as social glue. We then turned to the tongue itself, both muscle and wand. This organ, so often taken for granted, is the very tool that made civilization possible. Early societies understood their magic instinctively, words as spells, chants as rituals, names as power. Modern science has caught up, showing that rhythm, tone, and repetition change our bodies, heart rate, cortisol, and dopamine. Finally, we explored language as an evolutionary mirror. How cultures carve reality differently through their lexicons. How Russian distinguishes between shades of blue, how Mandarin sees time vertically, while English sees it horizontally. How the same phrase, I'm fine, can conceal in English what it reveals in Italian. And threaded throughout was one truth. Language is not neutral. It is embodied, cultural, and historical. It carries sediment from the past, charge in the present, and power to shape the future, the thread of continuity. If you've journeyed with me before, or if the Linguaverse is your first encounter with my work, let me open the door to the wider landscape. In the Inversiverse, I explored how the worlds we inhabit are shaped by perception and control. In the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, I gave voice to the emotions we're so often told to keep silent. And in The Body Knows, I traced how memory and meaning are written into flesh itself. The Linguaverse is another path through a new terrain, showing how words themselves carry those patterns, how they shape thought, bind identity, and cast spells in the nervous system. Each project approaches the question of being human from a different angle, but together they weave a single tapestry: body, language, and the hidden architectures of reality. Looking ahead, this is only the beginning. In the episodes ahead, we'll move deeper into the ways language shapes and reshapes us, how words live in the nervous system as the somatic lexicon, how mirror neurons transmit meaning before we even understand it, how political and cultural systems bend language into tools of control, and how we can break or reclaim these spells for ourselves. Language is the medium of freedom and the medium of captivity. To study it is to study the self, the culture, the spell book we live inside. So I'll leave you with this thought. Every word you speak is both inheritance and choice. Some words you carry were given to you long before you could resist them. Others you can choose, reshape, reclaim. The words we inherit are not always the words we want to live by, but they do not have to remain final. This is where the Linguaverse begins, with awareness. From here, we'll learn how to step into language consciously, to edit the lexicons written in our flesh, to speak not just words we were given, but words we choose. Until next time, stay curious, stay awake to your own language, and remember, the tongue may be a muscle, but it is also the compass of your truth. You've been listening to the Linguaverse, James Miller.